A young man by the name of Thomas Albert Dexter was so tired of people abbreviating his first name to Tom that from the age of 13 or so he introduced himself to everyone as Tad, being his initials, of course. No one questioned it. He was also so tired of his parents, who didn't understand him, or so they kept telling him, that at the age of 15 he, as they say, ran away from home. He got a job picking and shoveling in a cemetery, which he didn't mind at first because it rained quite a lot, and he sat under cover sipping tea all day. When the sun came out more frequently, he quit. He worked as a waiter, dishwasher, in a hotel near St. Albans, but he got tired of being asked repeatedly by guests in whispers, "What's a lad like you doing around here?" As though here was no place to be if you were in your right mind. Then he got lucky. He was taken on as a baker's roundsman in a little village called Redbourne. All he had to do was squeeze a handle, and an electric truck obligingly followed him as he delivered cakes and bread to the doors of villagers. He was allowed to eat what he wanted while doing the job, and I can tell you that, as I relate this to you, it's more than 40 years since he touched a British cake, or, for that matter, ate in a British restaurant. It might be the moment to inform you as to the real reason for which the British did so marvellously in matters of accumulating empires and winning wars. You see, the hypothesis is that if Britain's citizens can survive the nutritional torture they endure for the first 20 years of their lives, they can stand anything. So the Briton abroad, who is faced with the fanatical glare of a native whose territory he's about to take over, and whose dagger is quite close to one of his nostrils, finds it very easy to murmur, "Oh, don't be so silly," and ignore the man. Or the Englishman who stands watching a hefty bomb dropping towards him can, when the thing lands 20 feet away and blows him into his neighbour's vegetable patch, get up calmly, spit the odd lettuce leaf out, and scornfully shout to the skies, "You utter fool!" There's nothing he can't take. To get back to Tad. Once his rounds were finished, and he had completed the business of further fortifying his digestive system by consuming sundry doughnuts and the like for his lunch, he would join some of the youngsters with whom he would pass many a happy afternoon and early evening discussing what they were going to do. There was nothing to do, of course, except baiting Billy. Billy was a nearby farmer's bull. He was a sluggish great thing who loved not moving at all. He was most put out, therefore, when things were waved in front of his nose, and he was obliged, instinctively, to charge. The winner of the contest was the one judged to have got closest to the bull before it charged its protagonist, who rushed to the fence, leapt over, possibly without getting caught in the barbed wire, and preferably without getting bashed by the bull. There was an intriguing variation to the sport when Billy was grazing close enough to the fence. It was known as evil-eyeing Billy. The group would stare at him with great concentration, making mooing, baying, and whistling noises in the hope that he would charge the fence. He didn't. It was on one of those evil-eyeing days that Tad got an idea. What, he asked the others, what if they hypnotized the bull? Now the question was how. "You have a go, Tad," one of them said. "Go on." "All right," said Tad. "Nothing ventured?" And he began to speak to the bull. Billy he said seductively. You are warm and comfortable. You are relaxed. You are completely at ease. You feel fine, just fine, better than ever before. You feel calm all through your body, from your head all the way down to your feet. You feel deliciously heavy around the eyes. Your eyelids are relaxing. You're swimming in warmth, in calm. You're floating through the air. Everything is easy. Everything is warm. You never felt better. Calm, free, warm, easy, light, sleepy. Your eyes want to relax completely and close. Your eyes are closing. Your lids are dropping. You want to sleep, to go to sleep a sweet, peaceful sleep. Calm, warm sleep. Calm, warm sleep. Look! Tad whipped around at one of the group's voices. It was Jennifer, and she was pointing not at the bull, but at her 13-year-old brother Peter, who was lying on the grass sound asleep. Tad said, "Corks!" his favourite expression of surprise. Then he experienced a surge of panic. The group stood around Peter, forgetting the bull, who still wasn't taking any notice of them anyhow. And what was he supposed to do now? Tremulously, he said, "Peter, wake up!" Instantly, Peter opened his eyes, and Tad expected him to laugh and tell them that he'd been joking. But Peter said, "Wow, that was nice. Do it again." Within a fortnight, the Redbourne village green, when it wasn't being used for cricket, naturally, had become a showplace. Tad the hypnotist was a very popular attraction. Not only did most of the village turn up for these sessions, but outsiders popped along as well. Just about everyone wanted to have a go. It was hilarious. You could be sent to sleep and wake up not being able to remember your own name. You could make ardent love to a broomstick in front of the whole crowd. You could play the truth game and shock some of the villagers out of their wits. You could have pins stuck into you and not feel a thing. You could recall what you did on your 4th birthday as though it was yesterday. You could wake up and every time someone said pickled onions, you would not be able to control your laughter. Of course, you'd have to go back to Tad the next day because your stomach was aching from all the times pickled onions had been said to you by friends and neighbours, and you couldn't stop laughing. Then he'd hypnotize you and cancel the order, so to speak. You'd wake up and later, at, say, 9 p.m., walk through the village with a waste-paper basket over your head, shouting, "Arbally-barbally-blah, arbally-barbally-blah," over and over again until 9:30, without having the faintest idea that you were doing it. It was a scream. Tad's boss, whose name was Harry Woodward, took him aside and said, "Hey, how's about you using your powers to get him to buy more cakes, eh?" Tad didn't like Harry because he had greasy hair and a runny nose, so he said, "I'd rather not." So Harry said, "All right. Still, I tell you what, if you eat less of 'em yourself, it'll come to the same thing, won't it, huh?" Tad felt slighted. After all, he was a celebrity. I mean, his shows were even more popular than cricket. He longed for the day when Harry, too, would want to have a go. He didn't. The captain of the Redbourne cricket team was known as Chunk. Chunk walked up to Tad one day and growled, "Like to have a go at me, would you?" Tad swallowed discreetly and said, "If you want." The conversation went no further. It was easy to see why he was called Chunk. If you looked him in the eye for more than 3 seconds, you got a crick in your neck. The postman, an elderly man with a dashingly waxed moustache, insisted on Tad having a go, and he in full uniform too. When the postman was under, Tad addressed his audience as usual. Well now, ladies and gentlemen, what would you like our subject to do? A very elderly lady cackled. Make him deliver the mail to all the wrong doors. The crowd loved the idea, until the following day. It took a week to sort that all out. He was a bit more careful after that. Unfortunately, Tad had quite forgotten that Nancy Upton, who ran the village shop, had been commanded to not be able to read any word with the letter E in it. In other words, he didn't remember that he'd put no time limit on this particular instruction. Chaos was the result before the cause of it was understood. The village was beginning to have mixed feelings about Tad, the hypnotizer, even though the papers had got hold of it, and the Sunday Pictorial invited him to give a demonstration on their premises in Fleet Street. And there he was, on the back page, at work hypnotizing a gorgeous secretary with a lightly tanned skin and copper curls. The Redbourne village green was now more popular than ever. Outsiders outnumbered villagers by more than 2 to 1. And then 3 to 1, and then 4 to hardly any. He was told he should charge admission, but he didn't know anything about that. Harry Woodward was happy, for the visitors were lapping up his cakes. But in the main, the villagers weren't too pleased. The traffic was not what they'd bargained for, and besides, the novelty had worn off. And besides, Chunk and his pals were spending more time than was good for them in the pub. It ended in a satisfactory way, though. One afternoon, Tad was having a go at one of his audience. You are comfortable and warm and beautifully tired and relaxed. You are feeling better than ever before. You only want to float away and dream and float and dream and float out. And the audience loved it. Oh, how they loved it. But even though a little later they shouted, wake up, and shook him and stood him up and frog-marched him around, Tad remained quietly, peacefully asleep. So finally, they left him on the green and went their various ways. Some 2 days later, or thereabouts, Tad found himself waking up on a haystack. He didn't know how he had got there, but he didn't mind. He wandered along, feeling a mite hungry, and trying to remember how he had got there. The only thing he could recall, and rather vaguely at that, was a voice which somehow had whispered in his ear, you will forget entirely who you are and what you have been doing. And to this day, Tad cannot really understand why he hates English cakes. Unless he makes a great effort of concentration, but then that doesn't last too long. Oh, and by the way, I'd better make sure I haven't done any harm in telling you this little story by concluding with, wake up! upon a time when there were a few million less inhabitants of Mexico City than there are now, a few years ago to be more precise, and when you could see Popocatépetl from the city without peering at it through a dark yellow haze, and when there was not standing room only on many of its pavements, and when the Chapultepec Park was less like Coney Island on a Sunday, Susan and Philip Hamilton rented a little apartment in the Insurgentes. She quickly found a job as secretary in a German shipping company, and he got some translation work through a friend of his, Ernesto Camara, whom he'd known in the States. It suited them both. Susan liked the regular office hours, and Philip enjoyed working at his own speed and browsing around the city when he needed a break. Philip wasn't quite sure why his wife was interested in Mexico, but he was there for adventure. Sort of adventure he didn't know, but he was certain that Mexico was the place for it. And he was right. His first experience of it was when they dined out. Neither he nor his wife found a way to extinguish the flames in their mouths after the meal. Curry was mild by comparison, he judged. The waiter was amused. "It's quite normal food, senor." Philip's second adventure came as he handed in some of his translation work to the Centro Nacional de Productividad, and the director's stunning secretary handed him back a note which contained the drawing of a naked woman offering an apple to a naked man. Staggered, he almost collapsed into the chair opposite hers. She was smiling. Her black eyes were staring into his light blue ones, and then roving around his features with an unabashed hunger. He reasoned that it must have been his long, lean, and typically English form that had attracted her, for they hadn't spoken a word to each other until then. He protested. "Senorita, I am married." "So am I, senor. Or rather, I was. I'm divorced now with 5 children, and I have 2 brothers in the secret police." He hiccuped, laughed gaily, waved adios, and sprinted for the elevator. Chihuahua. Feeling safer on the crowded pavements, he allowed himself to be ushered along in the main stream, and a few moments later found that he was somehow turning into the entrance of what he recognized as the Latin American Tower, the tallest building in Mexico at the time. He saw that he was being swept towards the open doors of a lift, and tried to steer clear of them, but he was inside before he knew it, and the doors closed, and up he went, unable to move or turn anything except his head. After a while, the entire human contents erupted from the lift, including Philip, and streamed towards an opening in the corridor. They entered a large room joining an assembly of people who were standing around peering at something or other. Philip was just about to turn and dig his way out of the gathering when a voice at his left ear said, "What the hell are they looking at?" in English with an Irish accent. He swiveled to meet a mop of red hair, a pair of green eyes, and an uneven-toothed grin. "I can't tell. You'd think it was the President himself." "I wouldn't know. I'm on the way out." "Perhaps if we shove together." And they did. 4 elbows were clearly better than 2. They reached a lift in no time and got to the street. Beer? Good idea. A cantina was easy to find, chairs supplied through the generosity of Coca-Cola, or was it the other ghastly one? Well, no matter. "So, what brings you to dear old Mexico?" "Oh, I was about to ask you the same thing." "Love, me boy, love." "Love?" "Yep. Met me sweet little thing. Well, not so little, but sweet indeed. Name of Margarita. Met her in Kansas City and decided to come and have a look at her background." "Serious?" No, just curious, but do have a soft spot for her. Her family don't think much of me, but, well, it's not too surprising. I may be Catholic, but I'm Irish, and that won't do at all, my dear." Oh. "And if it did?" "If it did what?" "If it did do." "Oh, that wouldn't do at all. It'd be marriage, 10 children, and 20,000 family visitations a year. Couldn't stand it. Would break my heart, it would. No, as I said, I'm here for love. That's all." Unfortunately, Michael Ashdown, as his name turned out to be, was more of an optimist than was good for him. But it added to his charm and, as Philip discovered, to his recklessness. Philip invited Michael to dinner a couple of days later, and he, Susan, and Michael were sipping aperitifs and gazing down onto the Insurgentes, which wasn't too traffic-laden in the early evening. It was almost dark when Susan said, "Darling, I think someone's looking at us." Considering they were 3 floors up, Philip was taken aback by Susan's remark, but sure enough, he could see 1, 2, 3 men in the branches of the tree just outside their windows. "Oops. Oh," said Michael, peering through the glass. I think that's for me." Without another word, he bounded downstairs. Susan and Philip opened one of the windows and surveyed the scene below. Michael was now surrounded by 10 or 15 men. There was gesticulation and argument for a few minutes. The gathering then dispersed, and Michael returned, his teeth noticeably clenched. Over dinner, he explained that Margarita's family wanted him to break with her and go back to his own country. Even though Margarita was 26 and free to do what she wanted and so on, Mexico had its customs and traditions, etc., etc. Well, the remainder of the evening passed peacefully, and the next time they saw Michael was when they had arranged a picnic for the 4 of them, including Margarita. They'd driven to the wooded foothills leading up to Popocatépetl, and they had found a spot which they all agreed was just right. Margarita was a pleasant-looking girl, and it seemed to Philip and Susan she was really good company. They were just about to eat when Michael dashed to the car and emerged with a holstered pistol and a cartridge belt. "Just thought I'd try this out," he said, practicing a couple of fast draws, and then, to the consternation of everyone, firing at one of the larger trees. "Oh, you never know in Mexico. I believe in being prepared." While the others were viewing Michael's antics, They noticed that two mestizos, that's Mexicans of half Indian, half European stock, were standing nearby with their mouths open and gawking at this sort of red-haired cowboy prancing about with his gun. They vanished when Michael's shooting began to get wilder. Margarita, who clearly wasn't afraid of speaking her mind, told him to put the silly thing away. Somewhat abashed, he did so, but the picnic was strained after that. Philip thought it would be as well to avoid Michael in the near future until he had got over his Wild West phase. Oh, true, there was a certain amount of shooting here and there between rather family-minded families, but it was generally expected to be an all-Mexican affair. An Irishman somehow didn't fit into all that, even one from Northern Ireland. Susan and Philip thought they had seen the last of Michael Ashdown. There were enough fascinating people to meet anyhow without having to be embroiled in hot-blooded family affairs, besides which there were tricks to be learned. For instance, how to drink tequila properly with salt and lemon, how to avoid jealous brothers and husbands, how to cross a street and live, how to refrain, above all, from underestimating the intelligence of the Mexican, and how to appreciate the wealth of wit and art that suffused the whole nation with a splendid glow. They met Carlos, 30 years old, with immensely thick spectacles, who not only lived for classical music, he lived in it, his walls stacked with every work imaginable, and his speakers superbly organized so that any number of visitors could receive the full impact of the work wherever they chose to sit. They met Jeff, a Canadian, now married to Mercedes, once a pilot, then an alcoholic, and then a born-again Christian, and all the while a doctor to boot. They stood at the foot of the Aztec temple to the sun god. Roamed through the city of 1,000 fountains. Each day brought surprises, and shocks too. One of the shocks was Philip receiving a call from the British Embassy, who understood that he was acquainted with a certain Michael Ashdown, who, alas, had created a scene at the embassy by drawing a gun when he saw that the entire family of one Margarita Chavez had installed itself in the entrance and refused to budge until Senor Ashdown promised to leave their daughter alone.
Do us a small favour, Mr. Hamilton, and persuade Mr. Ashdown to leave Mexico alive. We understand that you have a car. We will deliver him discreetly to your door. Could you then drive him, say, to the northern outskirts of Mexico City and put him on the road? He has agreed to this, by the way. He feels a mite uncomfortable about staying in the country any longer, and he proposes to hitch to San Francisco, which we feel is an excellent idea. Don't you?
Yeah, well, no, of course. Yes. And that's what happened. Decidedly, Mexico was a land of adventure. You just didn't know what was going to happen next. Although somehow he doubted that they'd find anyone else in the tree outside their window. At least, not for the time being.